It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by ESPN+. The final chapter in the rivalry between Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor will be written on July 10th at UFC 264, which is exclusively available to ESPN Plus subscribers for $69.99. Visit espnplus.com/Spotify.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Happy Tuesday to all of our listeners. I'm excited to be able to record live in my office, and it doesn't feel like I'm in the pits of hell. So very eager to be able to do this show, answer your questions without my face burning off. At least that's my hope here. Hope everyone else is staying cool in the Pacific Northwest. An unprecedented weekend in terms of heat waves, and was certainly difficult here in our household. So hoping everybody's been able to stay cool, stay safe, and stay healthy. Going to be answering your questions on today's show. It's Twitter Tuesday, just tackling as many Seahawks, NFL, hard rock and metal, any questions like that you want to have me answer. I will be answering as many of those as possible on today's show. This episode is brought your way by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. I'm going to kick off this Q&A. No person in particular has asked this question, but I think it's fitting, given the news that came out late last week, that I just have this as a universal question from all the 12s. When are the Seahawks going to wear their original retro uniforms? We now finally somewhat have an answer to that question. I don't think I've had a question that has been asked more on Q&A sessions over the last 3 or 4 years than that particular question. When is Seattle going to be able to wear their retros? We want to see Russell Wilson in the old royal blue uniforms with silver helmet. Well, you may get to see that, but unfortunately, the original news that broke made it sound like 2022 was when you would see the Seahawks wearing an alternate uniform that was a throwback, but it's actually going to be 2023 at the earliest. According to some people that I've talked to, the Seahawks have already submitted their uniforms for the 2022 season, and the NFL at this point has not been willing to change that, even though they just now decided, oh, you can have a second helmet now, which has been the big holdup for the Seahawks wearing their throwback uniforms to begin with. You can't just send the Navy helmets to have them painted silver for a couple days and then send them back and have them painted blue. That's just not going to work. And so they haven't been able to wear their original throwbacks at any point, even though they want to. Now they will be able to, but with that uniform rule being put in place, the Seahawks have already sent in their alternates for the 2022 season, barring the league changing their minds and allowing teams to make last-minute adjustments to that. I would think that there's more than enough time to do that, but 2023 is when the Seahawks will finally get a chance to wear throwbacks if they choose to do so. I would think, based on how the team has handled things the last couple of years, that has been a top priority. They just have not been able to do it because of the one helmet rule, which now is getting scrapped. So hopefully now that question will no longer be asked, because we generally have an idea when those throwbacks are going to be worn. Let's get to your questions here on our show. Coming from Alex Ledbetter 15, which position group do you feel least confident in going into the season? Alex, I have to see the team more on the field in training camp. OTAs and minicamp practices, for one thing, I can't share a lot of the things that I saw during those practices because we have a strict code on what we're allowed to actually report from those sessions. Without fans being there, we're very limited on what we can report. And it's not really true football. You don't see offensive and defensive linemen battling in the trenches. Defensive backs can't make plays on the football. They can't be physical at the line of scrimmage with receivers. Running backs, you can't evaluate them because they're not getting tackled. There's no tackling in general. So until I've actually seen the team on the field in training camp, hard for me to necessarily answer that question. But if you're looking from an on-paper standpoint, I don't know that I'm concerned about the cornerback group, but I think that there's the potential, if things don't work out with that group, I think there is the potential for them to have some issues where they're going to be missing Shaquille Griffin, or they're going to be missing some of the other corners they've let walk over the past few years. Akella Witherspoon's got a ton of upside. He just hasn't played with consistency. And you could say the same thing for Trey Flowers returning for his fourth season in Seattle. Those two have had their moments where they've looked like starting caliber corners. I just don't know that there is a surefire starter in this group. I think there's a few guys that could be that caliber of player. We just haven't seen enough consistency. And a player like DJ Reed, he started 8 games last year and looked really good. That's still a fairly small sample size, though. I want to see what it looks like for an entire season with him as a starter on the outside. He's got to win that job first. Pierre Desir maybe is another player that could throw his hat in the ring and try to win one of those starting jobs too. So I think they've got some intriguing pieces, but I could see that position group being one that ends up not working out the way the Seahawks wanted to, just because they don't have that surefire starter. At least to this point, none of the guys that are on the depth chart have emerged as that player. Next question here coming from Austin. Do you think Colby Parkinson could jump Disley for tight end number 2? That's a really good question, because I will say this again, OTAs and mini camps, it's really difficult to assess and evaluate players because it's really glorified underwear Olympics. A lot like the first couple of days of training camp when they can't have shoulder pads on and things of that nature. But Colby Parkinson is ripped at 6'7", 265, 270 pounds. I mean, he looked like he was in good shape last year, even coming back for training camp, not being able to play because he was returning from a broken foot. He's always been a good-looking tight end, but he is ripped. He's chiseled right now, and he was moving really well in those OTAs and minicamp. Just such a natural pass catcher, too. And so from that perspective, maybe he could leap Disley. The thing that's going to work against him is not great film in college from him as a blocker. He was a receiver when he first went to Stanford and grew to 265 pounds. They put a lot of weight in his body, not a natural blocker. So I want to see what he looks like working in line, because he's going to have to be able to do that a little bit, especially because that's a strength of Will Disley's game. So right now I'm going to say no, he doesn't pass Disley for number 2. Maybe if he gets off to a hot start, that ends up happening, especially with Disley being in the final year of his rookie contract. But the Seahawks really love Disley, and he brings just a different toolbox to the Seahawks offense with his ability to run block, his former defensive line background. So I have Parkinson as number 3 tight end, but I could see him being a factor, though, especially in the red zone with his size, his athletic ability, and his soft hands. Jerry Sweet 44, any other veteran Seahawks that they could possibly try to land this offseason? And if so, who? Obviously, there are a lot of names that are out there right now that have yet to be signed. And the big one is Richard Sherman. I'm still going to sit here and tell you the chances of that happening are very slim, but it's not impossible because nobody else has thrown much money at him, and he lives in the Seattle area still. He has nothing against the Seahawks. So I could see a reunion happening there. I mentioned corner being a position I still view as a bit of a question mark, but I still don't see that happening. Geno Atkins, another player that's been thrown around. I've been told that maybe Seattle has some interest in. Robert Kindiche being there now makes me wonder if that's going to happen too, because Geno Atkins has not looked like the same player for the last couple of years. He's 33. Putting him back with Carlos Dunlap could make some sense at the right price, though, so don't rule that out. And, of course, people are going to mention KJ Wright. I think that ship, for the most part, has sailed. I don't think the door is shut, but I think it's very close. They want Darrell Taylor to be the guy at Sam linebacker. They have Cody Barton that can also play the position, started some games there as a rookie. I don't even think it's age. I don't think it's money related. I think Seattle just wants to have Darrell Taylor on the field, and they've got a lot of other pass rushers working off the edge. This is a good spot for him. So, again, don't rule it out. You know, if Taylor struggles early in training camp and Wright still hasn't signed anywhere, I could see him bringing him back. But for right now, I would say the chances of the Seahawks adding another bigger name veteran are pretty slim. I could see him adding a few more players at the start of training camp. Big trades, you know, maybe they might look into something like Stephon Gilmore or maybe Xavier Howard of Miami. I don't think that they would do that because of price point, but I'd be surprised they make any other major moves. And if they do, you know, the trade market is something John Schneider does like to explore. There might be a name I didn't mention that ends up becoming available, and then John Schneider's willing to make a move. But for right now, really no inkling about any of those guys coming to Seattle. Going to continue our Q&A here in a moment. We'll be back for the second quarter. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Baseball season is in full swing, and you can track all the action at BetOnline. Get all the latest news, odds, and info for all your sporting needs, including Major League Baseball, the NBA, NHL, and all of your UFC MMA action. Before the next pitch, head over to BetOnline on your laptop or mobile device and check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, and contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get into the game as teams prep for their runs to the playoffs. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
This episode is brought to you by HP Instant Ink. No one is reading your mind, but HP Instant Ink knows when your printer is running low and sends you new cartridges, so you never have to think about ink. Save up to 50%. You'll pay less than $5 a month for ink and never run out again. Find out if your printer is eligible and enroll today at hpinstantink.com. Conditions apply. For details, visit hp.com/instantink Spotify.
Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. It's Twitter Tuesday. Going to be answering as many of your questions as I can on today's show. Continuing the Q&A here with Jamie or 99. What do you know about Aldon Smith's status? Is he okay for training camp and even week one? I know as much as Pete Carroll told reporters at the mini camp a week and a half ago. I don't know anything more about his legal status at this point. That is still very much up in the air, but I do know that he was at the facility. He was doing some workouts, and that was going on during minicamp, but he did not actually go in the field. Not quite in shape is what I'm basing Pete Carroll's comments off of. They're trying to work him back into playing shape, and Carroll sounded optimistic. And again, Pete Carroll's always optimistic. He seems to have an optimistic view on everything, but it generally seemed like he felt confident that there was a good chance that Aldon Smith was going to be available at some point early in training camp and be able to come out and play. We'll just have to wait and see. I don't know anything about the legal proceedings. The team has kept quiet on that. This is a very similar situation to Quentin Dunbar last spring. I think that they're waiting just to see what happens here and hoping that he gets cleared. No idea, though, whether that's going to happen or not. I don't know anything beyond what has been reported with the incident that happened in Louisiana back in April, just a couple days after he signed. So the Seahawks are hopeful they're going to have him available, but the legal proceedings still have not played out yet to really know what's going to happen there. They're keeping their fingers crossed that they can have him and he can have another good season after making that stunning comeback with the Cowboys a year ago. JoJo Bunny Boy, what player needs to make the biggest jump in order for the Seahawks to be legitimate contenders? You know, there's a couple players that I could throw out here. If you're looking at the established veterans, I'm actually going to mention a player that everyone's hoping has a new contract soon. I'm going to say Jamal Adams is my first candidate here just because of what they gave up to acquire him. And I'm also basing this off of what we saw in the second half. He was battling injuries the first half of the season. Really, the second half, he was dealing with injuries. He had a couple surgeries this offseason after he played through a number of these ailments. And it was his first year with the team. You could tell early on there were some comfort issues, wasn't quite there with the defensive scheme, made some mistakes assignment-wise, had some coverage issues early. I felt like when he came back from his groin injury, though, after a game or two, he really turned it on, and you started to see what Jamal Adams is capable of, and I expect a far better second season from him now that he's been in this system for a year. The Seahawks know how to best deploy him, and if he's got a new contract in hand, as he's expecting he's going to, as the highest-paid safety in football, he's going to want to reward his team for that. And so I think Jamal Adams, elevate your play, be the first-team all-pro caliber player that you can be. And if you're looking at players that maybe haven't been heard of or players that are not big-name stars, that taking a big leap would really help this offense, I'm going to mention a player that hasn't played it down for the Seahawks. I think Dwayne Eskridge has the ability to be a player that elevates this team. We already know about DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, but I think one of the big issues this team had last year, late in the season, the second half, they didn't really have that third receiver that emerged that could really take the pressure off those top two receivers. Dwayne Eskridge can do that, and he's got a different skill set. This is a former running back that can create after the catch. You can run routes with him on the slot. You can use him on jet sweeps. There are things that he can do that are going to be really valuable in Shane Waldron's offense. We don't know a ton about it, but if it's anything like Sean McVay's offense. There's going to be more of those fly sweeps. There's going to be more of an emphasis on that quick passing game. I think Dwayne Eskridge has a chance to be a real game changer for this team. As far as players that are returning on the defensive side of the football, I think I'm going to go with DJ Reed here, just because, again, we saw him play well the 8 starts he had last year. I want to see a longer, more extended run of him playing well, though, to really be sold on him as a long-term corner. I think he's got the talent to do it, but again, that's a small sample size. If he's able to elevate his game to the next level, that cornerback position, if they can get that sorted out and have 2 really solid starters at that position with the talent they have at safeties, the pass rushers they have, and of course, the linebackers that they've got, then that defense has a chance to be a top 5 unit this year after playing really well in the second half of last season. Unashamed Rebel, if you were John Schneider, who would you try to acquire to finish building this roster? So I've written a couple articles on this. Again, going back to an earlier question, there are some valuable veterans that are still out there available. I don't know the Seahawks are going to be overly aggressive trying to add any players. Pete Carroll's made it clear they want to see the 90-man roster they've got right now in action in training camp. And so I don't know they're going to be making any other big moves, but I'm again going to throw the name Stephon Gilmore out there. Xavier Howard's been making some rounds. I wrote an article about that last week. I think the price tag and the fact that he's got a lengthy injury history, his knee is worrying me, but he is a fantastic player. I just think the fact that he already is one of the top 5 highest paid corners, and the reason he wants out of Miami potentially is because he wants more money. That just does not sound like a situation that would be ideal for Seattle. Stephon Gilmore wants a new contract as well, and he wants to be one of the highest paid corners. So that's certainly something that's looming, and he's 31. He's a little older player than Xavier Howard, but he's only 2 years removed from being Defensive Player of the Year. Seattle is truly in all-in mode. If somehow New England starts trying to move Stephon Gilmore, and I wouldn't rule that out, Bill Belichick will move star players. He's done it in the past, especially when they're into their 30s. I could see him doing that rather than paying Stephon Gilmore big bucks. If the Seahawks were willing to make that investment and bring him out to the Pacific Northwest, that could be the true game changer that puts this defense over the top, because now you've got a true shutdown corner. I think the chance of a deal like that happening is fairly slim, but we know John Schneider likes to be aggressive, so you can't rule it out. If the price is right, he's going to be looking into it if Stephon Gilmore is available. So that is a name that I think makes a lot of sense. And Akeem Hicks from the Bears might be another one to look at the defensive tackle position. But again, price point, what you have to give up. They already are without their first-round pick for this year. Those are things they have to consider when they are looking at some of these veterans that may or may not be available to add to their roster. Next question here coming from G Notorious. How soon can we expect an Adams extension? Seems like something that should be done as soon as possible. Again, going back to what I was talking about a few moments ago, Adams is expecting that record-breaking deal, and there even have been murmurs out there about him possibly wanting defensive end money because he led the defensive backs in sacks last year. Actually broke the NFL record that was held by Adrian Wilson, 9.5 sacks in just 12 games. He doesn't consider himself a safety. He considers himself a defensive weapon. So certainly that could make things more difficult here over the next few weeks as Seattle tries to get this extension done with the star safety. But when I look at past precedent, I expect that Jamal Adams' contract at the latest is going to be signed the first couple of days of training camp. We saw that with Bobby Wagner a few years ago, Dwayne Brown a few years ago, players that reported to camp and then they got the deal finalized. I could see that happening, but I could also see Adams getting his contract before they arrive. That has been a hot timeline for when Seattle has typically signed their big name players. It hasn't been all of the time. Russell Wilson got signed in mid-April a few years back with his latest contract. Cam Chancellor got an extension fairly early, but a lot of times John Schneider, Matt Thomas, their cap guru, they get these things worked out late in the offseason or early in training camp. And so that's when I would anticipate this is going to get done. I would really be surprised if he doesn't have an extension signed 2 or 3 days into training camp. If it prolongs past that, then maybe we do have a holdout on our hands. Maybe we do have a contract impasse on our hands. But I think the Seahawks and Jamal Adams are going to get it done. My prediction is it's going to happen right before the start of training camp. And that means the first day of practice, which I believe is going to be the 29th or 30th. They're supposed to report on the 27th. I think that window there is when this contract is going to get signed. Question here from Austin977. Do you think Mitchell Schwartz could be a possibility for a signing. So the names that have been thrown out there, I've gotten plenty of questions about Mitchell Schwartz this offseason, and Morgan Moses was another one. He just signed with the New York Jets, so you can take him out of the picture. I look at what Seattle has at tackle, and as good of a player as Mitchell Schwartz has been and may still end up being, he might still have some good football in it, but he's coming off a significant injury. There have been rumors that he might retire, and so I just don't know that the fit is necessarily there. They've got Brandon Shell and Dwayne Brown set to be their starters. They just drafted Stone Forsythe, who they are very high on. Think he could be a starter at either tackle spot down the road. Cedric Ogbuehi played well at the end of last season. Not saying they couldn't kick the tires in a player like that, especially if an injury happens. If one of their starters, heaven forbid, if Brown or Shell gets hurt in training camp and they need a new starter, then I could absolutely see them taking a look at Schwartz if he wants to play. But that's really the big question here. I just don't see it happening. I don't see any way that Mitchell Schwartz is going to end up with the Seattle Seahawks. Even if there are injuries, they've got some younger guys they really like. So I just don't see that being a move that's going to happen. When I return for the third quarter, I'm going to continue tackling your questions here. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Are you looking for a way to boost your workout game? Are you seeking a delicious protein bar without the sugar and carbs? Enter in the Built Bar. 18 amazing flavors, including nut and non-nut flavors. Some of the best ones: caramel brownie, cookies and cream, apple almond crisp, peanut butter, double chocolate. You're going to have a tough time eating just one. These bars are covered in 100% chocolate, soft, easy to chew. It's great for the health-conscious guy. Lose or maintain weight while indulging in a delicious treat. Bars are low-calorie, low-sugar, high-protein, high-fiber, and they're great for a keto diet. Remember to use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it is now impossible to stock all the parts you need in a traditional chain storefront. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the counterman orders the parts on his computer, choosing the only brand his warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com and in your pocket. RockAuto.com is a family business serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. Go to RockAuto.com to shop for auto and body parts from hundreds of manufacturers. Best of all, prices at RockAuto.com are always reliably low, and the same for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Why spend up to twice as much for the same parts? Go to RockAuto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car and truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Tuesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, tackling all of your questions here on Twitter Tuesday. So let's continue. Coming from Tom Gialanella, sorry if I butchered your last name, Tom. Which player looks more likely to be a candidate for the 53-man roster, Cade Johnson or Tamorrion Terry? Again, I've only seen these players for a handful of practices, and they haven't been in a training camp practice. So I think it's a little bit early to really rush to judgment here. But I'm going to base this off of the college tape that I've watched. Tamorrion Terry is a really exciting player. I could see it where both these players end up making the 53-man roster. They have that kind of upside. Terry's 6'3", a little over 200 pounds, ran in the 4.4s, and just 2 years ago had over 1,000 receiving yards at Florida State, which, by the way, has not had a good quarterback for like a decade. Since Jameis Winston left, they have not had a good quarterback there. And so he had those numbers with iffy quarterback play. Last year just didn't go well. He had some injuries, but he's certainly got talent. He's got great size. He's a guy that can be a red zone threat, high point the football. Cade Johnson, not the most explosive athlete. I think that's the reason he ended up going undrafted, but 4.5, 140-yard dash is more than acceptable for a player that is as crafty of a route runner as he is. He's tough. He can return kicks and punts. He had nearly 30 touchdowns his first 3 years at South Dakota State. I don't care if he was playing FCS competition. The guy knows how to find the end zone, and he's just a master technician from the slot. So I look at those two players. To me, Cade Johnson is probably the player that has a little better chance just based on his skill set, the fact that he's been a kick and punt returner, and he excels out of the slot. I could see Terry and Johnson both making the team, but based on what I've watched, a little bit I've seen at their practices and, of course, their college tape, I think Cade Johnson is probably the player that I would say has a little better shot, but they're both very much going to be in the mix for one of those roster spots. Next question here coming your way from Chris Watkins. Hi, Corbin. Do you think we are set at center with Ethan Posick? For this year, I think so. I think the Seahawks definitely gave Ethan Posick a vote of confidence in free agency by giving him just a one-year deal. At the time, I was looking at the money and I thought, this clearly indicates that they might go out and get somebody else. But then they didn't draft a center in the second round. They picked Dwayne Eskridge instead. And you look at the players that were still there. They could have gotten Creed Humphrey out of Oklahoma or Quinn Miners out of Wisconsin Whitewater. They chose not to do that, though, because they believe Ethan Posick is going to take a big step forward in his second full year as a starter. And that's that's really the thing to look at here from Seattle's perspective. He doesn't have a lot of snaps under his belt at the center position since coming into the NFL. So there's reason to believe, he's just 25 years old, that he may be able to take a big step forward this year. And he did some encouraging things last year, had very few penalties, held up better in pass protection than they thought. He struggled in the playoff game, but the entire Seattle offensive line struggled against the Rams in that game. They just do that to opponents. The Rams have a fantastic defensive line led by Aaron Donald. I think Posick certainly has a chance to take a step forward. Now, as far as beyond this year, he is on a prove-it deal. He's got to show that he can take that big step forward. If not, then they're going to be back at square A trying to figure out who's going to be our starter at the center position. Maybe Damian Lewis gets moved at some point. There are a lot of variables here, but at least for now, they feel comfortable with having Posick, and they clearly like Kyle Fuller as well, bringing him back on another one-year contract for the 2021 season. Jeremiah writes, how big of a jump do you think Alton Robinson will take this year? I actually just wrote his 90-man primer yesterday on Seahawk Maven, and it was one of the more interesting case studies looking at best and worst case scenario, because as well as Alton Robinson played last year, and I thought he did not play enough snaps, even after Carlos Dunlap was acquired. I just was wondering, why is this kid not playing more? When he comes in, he makes things happen against the run and as a pass rusher. He had 4 sacks, 5 tackles for loss, and really limited snaps for most of the year. I thought that he was a player that really came on as the season progressed, and he had a great training camp too. The problem is you've got Dunlap coming back. If Alden Smith's available, then that's just another player that's going to be taking snaps at the Leo defensive end spot. Benson Mayowa, they might still use Darrell Taylor there some. When is Alton Robinson going to be able to see the field? He can play both end spots, so that certainly helps his cause a little bit. But I just look at the players they brought in. I just don't know how much he's going to be able to play. Now, if he has another really good training camp, some of those veterans they signed, Pete Carroll's not going to care about the money they put into those players. If Alton Robinson's out playing him, then he's going to get the snaps, and he could certainly be a difference maker for them. I just don't know how much he's going to play. It's going to be an interesting position group to watch. Rasheem Green falls in that category as well, a young player that maybe can have a breakout year, but are the snaps going to be there with some of the veterans that they've added? Next question from ST Dominguez. If Jamal Adams somehow is not signed, what do you think about Marquise Blair as a replacement? So I still think Marquise Blair has the talent to be a starting safety in the NFL. There's no doubt in my mind. In fact, I've grown more keen on the idea of him playing free safety. Quandre Diggs has been fantastic, though. So you don't want to just replace Diggs in the lineup with Blair. They've got some really interesting questions that they have to consider. That being said, I don't see Jamal Adams leaving. Like I said earlier on the show, I think the Seahawks have to get this done. Jamal Adams wants to be here, so I don't see this being a scenario that plays out anyway, unless Adams gets hurt again. Marquise Blair is going to be playing that nickel corner spot. There's a better chance of him being your free safety if they decide not to re-sign Quandre Diggs. I'm an advocate for re-signing both those safeties, but money's going to be tight, and that's a lot of money to pour into the safety position. They might not be able to do it. If that's the case, Marquise Blair at free safety, that might be his future in 2022 and beyond. Ronnie Abidali. Hi, Corbin. Do you think Russell Wilson can honestly win MVP next season? I'm going to say the same thing I've said for the last 3 or 4 years. Absolutely, he can win MVP. Do I think it happens? Probably still fairly low odds. But when you look at the weapons they've got on offense, Metcalf, Lockett, I believe Dwayne Eskridge is going to be a difference maker right away for them with that different skill set, the athleticism, the explosiveness, toughness after the catch. Colby Parkinson coming back healthy to go with Gerald Everett, who's got a chance to really break out as the number 1 tight end. Will Dissly, full year removed from his Achilles injury. The running backs that they've got. The offensive line's been upgraded with Gabe Jackson, one of the best pass protectors in the league. No excuses can be made with the players that have been put around him. The Seahawks have the personnel to be the number 1, number 2 offense in the NFL. Russell Wilson's just got to be able to play at his best. And there were certainly some factors working against him in the second half. The play calling became predictable. It felt like the offensive line was not as good the last month or so in the season. That impacted him as well. The offense changed up a bit when he had a few bad games throwing interceptions. There's a lot of variables there. But Russell Wilson's got to show that he can play close to the level. I don't expect what he did the first 8 games last year to happen for an entire season because he was just on a ridiculous pace. But if he can come close to that and he can hold that up for most of a season, we're talking 45-plus touchdown passes. And with his running ability still being a factor, even at 33 years of age, then he absolutely can be an MVP. I think a lot of this weighs on, does Wilson improve in the quick game? Does he hit receivers in the middle of the field? Is he unloading the ball and not taking as many sacks? And can Shane Waldron help him achieve those goals in the new offensive coordinator? If all those things happen with the weapons they've got, then he should be one of the favorites to win MVP. He's just got to put everything together for the entire season. We'll see if that happens this year. Closing out our Q&A question from G. Notorious. What happened to John Ursua? Arrived with some hype and seemed to have a connection with Russ. So I've looked at this for the last couple years because I was really excited about John Ursua. You watch the Hawaii tape, his ability to run routes from the slot. I see a lot of similarities to what Cade Johnson looks like as a route runner, right? A player that's just a crafty route runner that can break tackles, create after the catch, knows how to run routes against defense. He knows what the defense is trying to do. And so for that reason, I really thought John Ursua was going to have a chance to maybe be that guy in the slot for them. And yet he didn't play in any games last year. He only played a handful of snaps his rookie season. There's been a couple things that have really held him back. For one, he's had a few untimely injuries in training camp. That hasn't helped his cause. When you're a fringe player, you need to be available. 2, he had issues picking up the playbook his rookie year, and as the year progressed, he was able to get better in that capacity, and the Seahawks were more comfortable with him, but that was not a good look for him either. But to me, the most important thing, he just doesn't offer you enough on special teams. He has returned some kicks and punts at practices, but he's never really been a front runner to have a chance to win that job. He's not going to contribute making tackles and kick and punt coverage or any other special teams unit. And so that really hurts him. Players like Penny Hart that made 4 tackles last year on special teams are much more valuable as end of the depth chart guys at receiver because they offer that versatility. That has really hurt him more than anything. And I think he is approaching probably his last opportunity to make things work in Seattle. He's got the receiving talent to make the team, but if he's not going to be a contributor on special teams, if he doesn't show he can play on the third phase and help this football team win games, I don't see how he makes this team with some of the other receivers that are on the depth chart that, like Cade Johnson, can offer special teams value. We'll see what happens. I just think that the clock is about to strike midnight. Maybe he lives up to some of that hype this training camp and really busts out. I wouldn't rule it out completely, but I think the odds are working against him with some of the players that they have added. As always, 12s, glad to have you listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to check out our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google, and the all-new Odyssey app. When we come back for the Wednesday show, my co-host Rob Rang will be returning, and we're going to be continuing our 90-player countdown, plus taking a close look at a possible extension for Dwayne Brown as he enters the final year of his contract. Thanks for your questions. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.
The Clippers live to fight another day. Here's what our local experts are locked on today. The LA Clippers defeat the Phoenix Suns 116-102 in Game 5 to stay alive in their series, which now stands at 3-2 in favor of the Suns. Our local experts in Los Angeles, Chuck Mockler and William Updike, called it Paul George's best playoff performance ever. Listen to that today on Locked On Clippers. The defending champion Tampa Bay Lightning won Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals 5-1 over the Montreal Canadiens. Today on Locked On Canadiens, the major defensive adjustments that must be made to keep them in the series. Are Damian Lillard's days in Portland numbered? The answer is on the Locked On Today podcast. All the sports news you need in under 20 minutes. Follow Locked On Today, wherever you get podcasts. Local experts on the biggest stories. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.